Alright, HMIS users, for this segment of HMIS training, we are going to be going through an overview of intake, exit, and reports. If you are a HMIS new user, you will receive a username and temporary password along with the website link to ClientTrack, Eccovia's website. Go ahead and enter in your username and password and sign in. If you have multiple workgroups and multiple organization access, you will have the option to select those workgroups and organizations here. If you only have one, you will automatically be taken to the home screen. So go ahead and use these settings if it's appropriate, and you will be taken to the ClientTrack home screen. Here you'll find a basic overview of your organization's projects, cases, and clients. In the upper left-hand corner, go ahead and select that hamburger icon. I like to have always show the menu selected pin. Notice that we have a dashboard off to the left-hand navigation menu, quick services, recent, caseload, BNL, which means by name list, my information, my team, change my password, paused operations, my submitted issues. Go to the ClientTrack symbol at the top, and next to that is a very important button. It'll allow you to navigate between different screens in ClientTrack. So go ahead and press that button. When you open that screen, you'll notice that you have access to 3 different areas. The first area is the home screen, which you are currently on. The next screen is the client screen, where the meat and potatoes of intake and exit are for your client management. And then you have the report screen all the way to the right. I'll be going over each of these sections, but for now, let's get back to what you really want to know, and that's the taking your paper forms and entering them into HMIS, right? Off to the left of our navigation menu, we have dashboard, find client, intake. We have HMIS common assessments, which we'll review after our intake process. We have other assessments, enrollment and services, RI assessments, SPDAT assessments. The one thing I want you to remember above all else is before you do any data entry into the HMIS database, always search for the client. And the way you do that is in the left-hand corner where it says Find Client, click that. There's 3 strategies I want you to use before entering in a client, and that is to use the first 3 letters of the first and last name, to use the 4 numbers of the 4 last numbers of the social security number, and the date of birth. The reason why this is important is because you can have a person named John spelled John, and another John may be spelled Jon. So the first strategy, you might not be able to search and find that client, but if you have the access to the social security number or the birth date, you may be able to find that. It prevents deduplication, and it will save you time if you already find the client, because you could use that profile and all that basic information to intake that person. So let's search for John Doe. The first thing I would do is enter in a JOH, and then for the first name, and then their last name, I would be DOE, right? First 3 letters of the first and last name. Hit enter. I did find a John Doe, but let's use Jon. John doesn't come up, so for this example, I'm going to use a Jon for my data entry and DOE for the last name of my client. But before I do that, I'm going to search for his last 4. He didn't pop up. John Doe, my John Doe did not pop up, so I'm going to go ahead and search for a birth date just in case he doesn't have his social security number in ClientTrack. No John Doe. So I could be confident that John Doe is not in the HMIS database. However, if you did search and find your client, and if your client populated in the list below, you could go ahead and select that client or you will be taken to the basic client demographic of that client. But I'm going to show you how to do a new client first. So I've already searched for this John Doe. He's not in the database. I'm going to go ahead and intake him. How do you do that? You'll notice that there's an intake button just below Find Client. So go ahead and hit that intake button, and a couple options will be presented to you. Do you want to add a new client? Do you want to use the current client, or select another client? We've already searched for that client, right? So we already did our due diligence and we know this person's not in the database. The current profile that I'm currently on is not the person I'm doing the intake on. Hit that add a new client. One thing I do want to mention is you search for a client and you find that there's duplicates of that client, go ahead and send HMIS support an email. For now, I'm going to enter in my John Doe. After you enter in the couple fields of to begin the basic client information of that profile, and in the lower right hand corner hit save, it'll take you to a basic client information profile. And this is where your universal data elements begin, such as first name, last name, name quality, social security number. Before I continue on, I just want to explain one thing. Notice that there's this name quality field. You'll find under some data elements there is a quality field under them, such as date of birth. And if the social security number wasn't populated, it'll also be there. What these name quality fields, what these quality fields do is just indicate to you if you are to generate a report, or to HMIS if we're running a data quality report, that whether these the fields that reference them are either partial or incomplete. So for birth date, go ahead and enter in that birth date. If for some reason you do not have a complete birth date, it is optional for you to enter in 01 for the month and 01 for the day, and complete the year they are born. For instance, if someone were to tell you they were the age of 37 and you had no additional information on that person, you could calculate backwards based on the current date what year they were born. So if they told you they were in 37 years of age, you could estimate that they were born in 1982, and you could fill in that birth date with that feature. All right. Date of birth quality, again, this is another quality field. In this example, full date of birth is reported. For the next field, ethnicity and race, I'm going to be referencing the HMIS data standards. You will find the HMIS data standards manual in the documents section under courses on the HMIS training website. Go ahead and reference this document for all HMIS data input fields. Let's search for race. Notice that there's a rationale explaining why you are collecting the information you're collecting, and data collection instructions on how to collect that information. For now, I'm going to read off the data collection instructions for race. In separate data fields, record the self-identified races of each client served. Help the client select the race or races that they most identify with. Allow clients to identify as many racial categories as apply, up to 5. When enrolling a client who already has a record in HMIS, verify that race information is complete and accurate, and correct it if it is not. Staff observations should never be used to collect information on race. Provide all options to every client. Even if staff believes that they can guess a client's race, every client must be asked for their self-reported information. No documentation is required to verify a client's response. Client doesn't know, client refused, and data not collected are explanations for missing race data. None of these three responses are valid in conjunction with any other response. This data element can be challenging to separate from ethnicity. As one example, some people of Latin American descent often indicate their race as Hispanic and would not be referred to in casual conversation or seen in their communities or by themselves as white or black or African American. Unless the person is from an original peoples group that is indigenous or American Indian, in which case they would select that option, the staff will have to ask follow-up questions to ascertain the best response for race. Staff may ask something like, do you know if your ancestors were originally from a country like Spain, somewhere in Africa, or are you part of an indigenous group? The response is tied to where their ancestors came from, not necessarily where they were born or lived during their lifetime. By the time clients get to data element 3.05 ethnicity, they may have already responded to race with something like Hispanic, Guatemalan, or Latino, so staff should be able to clearly distinguish between these two data elements and select responses accordingly, even if the answers are provided out of order. You reference the Data Standards Manual if you have questions related to the data collection on any field that you come across, because it's important that our information is consistent across all of Riverside County for the collection of that information. All right, so for ethnicity, I'm going to go ahead and choose Hispanic, and for race, I will choose white. Gender, we'll put male, and veteran status, we'll hit no. All the asterisks are required fields, and next to those fields, there's a blue icon with a question mark that will provide you additional data collection instructions if you do not want to reference the Data Standards Manual at that time. There is an option for show address and contact information. If your project decides to collect address information for that client, they could enter it in here. There are reports that will utilize these fields that are provided by ClientTrack. At the very bottom, you'll notice that there's a family information screen where the relationship to head of household is self. You will always begin your intake with the head of household. The head of household is identified with self, so you begin with that person, and then when you hit finish in the lower right-hand corner, you will be taken to the family screen. For the family members section, here you will add all the family members to the head of household. Notice off to the left-hand side, there is a workflow opening up to you. Just under intake, there's a pause button, and there's a cancel the workflow. For good habit, it is recommended that for whatever intake you are recording at the moment, complete it until it's finished. If you pause or cancel out of a workflow that you have started and begin to save, and then you never return, it will create data qualities issues later. So please, if you have a stack of intake forms that you are starting, go ahead and decide whether you are not or able to finish that stack, and if not, do not begin the process. So we've recorded the basic client information first, and now we are on to family members. You will need to select the checkbox off to the left-hand side next to the first name column. So let's give John Doe a family member. Sarah Doe. What happened? That's right. For all family members, you must search for them as well. And look, there is a Sarah Doe in this database. But remember, use the first three letters of the first and last name. If you use that strategy, you'll be confident that you are not creating duplicates. So I'm going to go ahead and use this client, Sarah Doe. I'm also going to update the capitalization of the last name. Previously, you were entering basic client information vertically. Here, you are doing it horizontally. So go ahead and tab through these options, and just a quick pointer for you that are watching, if you tab through and push the letter of the option response, such as F for full date of birth, it will automatically take you to that selection, so you could continue to tap through. Indicate the relationship to head of household. In this case, this person is a spouse of the head of household. Notice I pushed S 3 times to get to spouse. Veteran status. Race will automatically populate to the head of household's race. Go ahead and select different options of race to change that, and then off to the right hand side there is a green checkbox. Go ahead and select that to change, to make the update to that change. And the same thing for ethnicity. If the ethnicity of the person attached to that family member is different, you could go ahead and change that at this time. And that's it. We've added that family member. Go ahead in the lower right hand corner, hit save and close. Pay close attention to the selection of the fields in this screen. Ensure that you are selecting the appropriate project. If you have searched and found a client, and when you come across this screen, there are family members attached to that client, but they are not part of the intake process for that client, you only select the clients that are being enrolled in your project. So to clarify, if you have many family members and they're not part of the intake process of your family emergency shelter, only select the applicable family members when enrolling. Notice when I do that selection, the project start date occurs on the date that it currently is. So go ahead and if you're doing back data entry, for instance, if I did this on the 1st and not the 3rd, you would indicate so. But what is project start date? What does that mean to you? How will you know if you are an emergency shelter, if you're a street outreach project, if you're a transitional housing, if you're coordinated entry? What does project start date mean to you? How would you find out what that means? Well, above here, you can see that there's a short description of each field. So for project start date, street outreach is the date of first contact with the client. Emergency shelter, it's the night the client first stayed in the shelter. Safe haven and transitional housing, the date the clients moved into residential project, first night of residence. Permanent housing, including rapid rehousing, date the client was admitted into the project. To be admitted indicates the following factors have been met. Information provided by the client or from the referral indicates they meet the criteria for admission. The client has indicated that they want to be housed in this project. The client is able to access services and housing through the project. The expectation is the project has a housing opening on-site, site-based, or scattered site subsidy, or expects to have one in a reasonably short amount of time. For all other service projects, including coordinated entry, it is the date the client first began working with this project and generally received the first provision of service. Since I'm enrolling this person into an emergency shelter, I put the project start date of the night that they spent at that emergency shelter. In the lower right hand corner, hit save. Notice the assessment date follows the project start date. This is important consideration. If you change the project start date, all the assessments and master assessments must change to that date. There are a couple of different periods of time in which you are recording information in HMIS. One of those processes is the intake, right? That is the beginning of a data collection stage. There's also annual assessments and also exits. So all of these periods of time have a specific date that is associated with all the assessments that are recorded with those collection data stages. Age of assessment, 37. Assessment date, entry, assessor, that will be you. Program, we've enrolled the person in the family in emergency shelter. Disabling condition is really a two-part question. Record whether the client has a disabling condition at the time of each project start. A disabling condition is one or more of the following: a physical, mental, or emotional impairment, including an impairment caused by alcohol or drug abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, or brain injury that is expected to be long continuing or of indefinite duration, substantially impedes the individual's ability to live independently, and could be improved by the provision of more suitable housing conditions. A developmental disability or HIV/AIDS. Client location will automatically populate Go ahead and enter in a prior zip code. Prior living situation essentially means where did they sleep the night before their entry into the program. Where did you sleep last night? I slept on the streets. I would record that as place not meant for habitation. Length of stay in prior living situation. How long did they stay in that prior living situation? They've been on the streets 1 year or longer. Approximate date of homelessness started. For permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing projects, you will want to spend more time with the client gathering living situation information. For instance, if a client spent last night at a friend's house, you would ask, how long did you spend at that friend's house? So if the client spent a couple days, less than 7 days, at a friend's house, and just prior to that, they spent the night on the streets, you would ask applicable follow-up questions such as, how long were you on the streets before you spent the night at your friend? If they spent 3 months on the streets, and just prior to that, they spent a month in a hospital, again, you would ask, where did you sleep before that hospital stay? Was it on the streets? If they answered yes to that, you would continue to go back to identify the appropriate homelessness start period. For emergency shelter and street outreach, this approximate date of homelessness started is a self-reported answer, but for projects such as permanent supportive housing and rapid housing, you definitely want to spend a greater deal of time understanding the prior living situation of the individual. Regardless of where they stayed last night, the number of times the client has been on the streets, in an emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, including today. We'll say 4 more times. Total number of months homeless on the street, in an emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years. We'll say more than 12 months. Indicate whether they were covered by health insurance. If you select no, it'll automatically populate no's for the appropriate response option. Go ahead in the lower right hand corner, hit save, and you'll be taken to the universal data assessment of the next individual. Hit save, and you're finished. If you have additional data collection because you are a project that, such as RI or SSVF, PATH, HUD-CoC, you may have additional data collection. The workflow will automatically take you through all those collection periods. Go ahead and hit finished when you are completed. Notice now we have an enrollment with 2 active household members, household types, and a project start date. There is also a table for John's services. Notice up in the very top corner, there's a client ID. When you're in communication with HMIS support regarding any client, please reference this ID. It's easier and also helps retain the privacy of the individual by not referencing any names or personally identifiable information. So let's talk about services. For services, especially for your other funders such as SSVF and RI and PATH, it is required that you enter in services for each of your clients. So how do we do that? Well, there's a services folder just under enrollment and services where you can access and add new services in the upper right hand corner. You'll want to select the appropriate enrollment, the appropriate grant, and also the appropriate service for that grant. Notice there's a date field. Indicate the date of actual service provision. For instance, if they spent the night on October 1st, 2019, and you were wanting to record additional services for the beginning enrollment, you would date it for that date. Feel free to explore these options for your organization, but it's important to remain consistent. In general, the units of measure and the unit value has already been determined with the project setup. Go ahead in the lower right hand corner, hit save, and you've recorded your services. For path-specific services, there's the referral screen where you could add a new referral in the same manner as you did the services. If you want to review your common assessments that you've just completed in HMIS, you can do so under the HMIS Common Assessments folder. There's a Master Assessments folder, which will have access to all of the assessments that you have completed. Notice that there's an enrollment line. Next to that date, there is a blue action wheel which you could view related assessments. Go ahead and select that and view related assessments. Remember, if you search a client first in intake, the workflow will automatically take you through all the processes that you need to do. So now that we have done that, I'm going to introduce you to some other features of the client management dashboard. Next to the project in the John's enrollments, there's a blue action wheel. Go ahead and press that. Here you'll find the ability to exit the client. You can also edit the enrollment. You can also, if the client has stayed in your project greater than a year, conduct annual assessments. So let's go ahead and look at that feature. It's unlikely that emergency shelter stay that the client would be staying at the shelter greater than a year. But let's go see that. Let's review this feature. Verify the enrollment. In the lower right hand corner, put no changes. You could do an update of the client information, or if the client has stayed greater than a year, on 30 days before and after the anniversary of their project enrollment. For instance, in this case, John Doe enrolled in our project 10/1/2019. So I would have September and the end of October to conduct the annual assessment of the following year in 2020. Let's see what that looks like. Assessment type, annual, assessor, program, prior zip code. Here you would indicate whether the client received access to health insurance under your care. Hit save in the lower right hand corner. You would also be required, based on the date of the head of household. The head of household was enrolled on 10/1/2019, and during the enrollment over the year, a family member joined the head of household, let's say 3 months later. And so that would indicate that they were enrolled January of 2020. You would still provide an annual assessment based on the head of household date of October 1st. So this annual assessment would be conducted on October or September of 2020. All applicable assessments will follow in the workflow. Hit finished when you are finished. Before I continue on, I'm going to take you through some additional features that are available to you. You can edit client information by selecting hyperlinks just above the client profile picture. Here you could quickly change client information. When you are finished, you would hit finished, and you will be automatically taken to the dashboard. You can also edit client with the same features. There's alias history, which you can provide additional aliases. Case management, case notes if you want to add case notes, client files if you want to add documentation and verification. Information release, here you could add interested others of persons not enrolled into the case. Living situation is an important field for street outreach, coordinated entry, and night-by-night shelters. Notifications. Photo, if you would like to add a photo. Veteran information is collected through the workflow, but if you would like to update this information, you can feel free to do so here. All right, now that we have already completed 2 of the 3 data collection stages, let's finish up with the final one, which is exit. Go ahead and navigate to the blue action wheel. Hit exit the enrollment. I'm going to choose rental by client, no ongoing housing subsidy. You may choose the exit reason However, again, you're only required to do the asterisk fields. Your workflow will take you through the required data collection components. Enter in prior zip code. Coverage by health insurance. We're going to select yes. Medicaid. Hit save in the lower right hand corner. Do you want to exit Cerrado? Yes. Destination. Owned by client, no ongoing housing subsidy. With ongoing housing subsidy. And you're not finished until you hit finished. All right, so we've enrolled a client. We did a quick overview of the annual assessment and also the exit. So let's review some reports. Remember, navigate to the ClientTrack symbol. Next to that, you'll find that navigation button that will open up the additional screens, and go ahead and select reports. There's a lot of reports here. You have active client list, HMIS by names list veterans. You have HMIS exports. If you're a HUD CoC funded project, here you'll find your HUD CoC CSV APR. If you're a SSVF funded project, you have your CSV export for your SSVF export for your CSV 2020 export. And if you're RI, here you'll have your RI export CSV 2020. In general, there's two types of reports in HMIS. You have reports that are readily available and open up to you in a similar format of a PDF. Then there's asynchronous tasks that take some time to generate. You will find these reports on the Files on Server page. Let's talk about how we're going to generally generate reports. You're going to choose the enrollment period. It could be a grant period, for instance, or whatever period of time that you're looking at. There are also predefined date ranges which you can choose from. I'm generating a HMIS active client list, so you could choose the report type for different periods of time. For instance, active at any point. So if I'm choosing this period of time, which is the current month, all clients who have enrolled, exited, or are currently active during that time period will be pulled in this report. I could choose begin enrollment, which are clients who began enrollment during this time period, or clients who just exited during this time period, or clients who are still enrolled. I'm going to leave everything at default. The active client method, the organizations will default to your organization. The project time, you do not need to select, but you can to filter out specific project types or programs. So you have to select a program to generate all the reports in HMIS. In this case, I'm going to choose the Path of Life Emergency Shelter Project. Remember, I enrolled Sarah and John. They were active at some point during this month, and so they were pulled on this report. You can, in some of the reports, you will have some hyperlink interactive buttons to access additional information. Go ahead and expand and explore this feature for yourself. In the upper left-hand corner, you could also navigate between pages. At the very top in the middle, you have the option to download as an Excel document, PDF, or Word. Once you generate the asynchronous report, such as the export that are found under HMIS exports, they will be located on the Files on Server page at the top. You should be able to access the CSV files that are generated by those reports. Let's go back to the home screen and recap some additional features that we have access to here. The quick services, multiple clients. You could add multiple services for multiple clients here. Recent, notice that we've recently enrolled Sarah Doe and John Doe. We have a caseload. These are our current case members that we are that are inactive due to the completion or exit of those clients. The by names list. This is the inclusion of coordinated entry, as this process April of 2020, you'll notice more features in that regard. My information, this is your current client profile and as well as your email address. You could change your password. There's paused operations and submitted issues to HMIS. So that's a quick review of all the intake, exit, and report features of HMIS. If you have questions, feel free to contact HMIS support.